They laughed at my military career and called me the family disappointment at our reunion, not realizing I own the company that employs half of them. Stick around because what started as family ridicule turned into the most satisfying revelation they never saw coming. And if you're into stories about quiet strength, secret success, and the perfect moment to reveal your true worth, hit that subscribe button right now. Being the black sheep isn't so bad when you're secretly the shepherd. I never planned to expose my success. For 15 years, I let my family believe I was struggling. The divorced veteran who couldn't quite find her footing after leaving the service. But people can only push you so far before something breaks. And at our annual Mason family reunion last month, that something was my patience. I'm Katherine Mason, though everyone in my family still calls me Katie, like I'm perpetually the awkward 12-year-old with scraped knees and mismatched socks. Officially, I'm the CEO of Meridian Defense Solutions, a specialized security consulting firm that works with corporations and government agencies across the Southeast. We've grown from a 3-person operation to a company of over 200 employees with offices in 4 states. What my family doesn't know? I founded Meridian 15 years ago, after leaving the Army with the skills, connections, and vision that nobody in my family ever bothered to recognize. I've kept my position quiet, operating through layers of management and deliberately staying out of industry publications and press releases. As far as my family knows, I do something with computers and security and barely make ends meet. The path to this moment started 20 years ago when I enlisted in the Army right after high school, much to my parents' dismay. The military is for people who can't get into college, my father said, shaking his head. My mother cried for weeks, telling neighbors her daughter was taking a detour before she found her real path. Meanwhile, my younger sister Elaine was preparing to start at Vanderbilt with a generous contribution from our parents, who never questioned funding her business degree while dismissing my decision to serve. My brother Michael was already 3 years into his job at our father's insurance company, being groomed to take over the family business someday. Katie's always been different, my mother would say at family gatherings, lowering her voice like my career choice was something shameful. We're just praying she figures things out soon. Different didn't cover half of it. While my siblings attended country club events and built connections through my father's business associates, I was developing expertise in cybersecurity and intelligence operations, deploying to 3 different countries, and earning commendations that my family dismissed as participation trophies. When I decided to leave active duty after 8 years of service, my father actually smiled with relief. "Finally coming to your senses," he said, as though my service had been an extended teenage rebellion rather than a calling. What they didn't understand was that those 8 years gave me everything I needed to build something extraordinary. I had specialized skills that were increasingly valuable in the private sector. I had connections to dedicated professionals who would later become my first employees and clients. And most importantly, I had a vision for security solutions that bridged military precision with corporate needs in a way few competitors were offering. The first few years were admittedly lean. I used my savings to bootstrap the company, working 18-hour days from a tiny apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina, deliberately 2 states away from my family in Georgia. I hired 2 former Army colleagues who believed in my vision, and we lived on determination and instant noodles while building our first security protocols and finding initial clients. My family, predictably, saw only the struggle. "How's your little security project going?" my brother would ask during holiday visits. The same way you might ask a child about a lemonade stand. "Dad could probably use someone to manage the office security system if you need real work," he'd add. Never missing an opportunity to emphasize the word real. During those early years, my divorce from David, another Army veteran who couldn't handle that my company was becoming more successful than his corporate career, gave my family even more ammunition. "Military marriages never last," my mother sighed to my aunt. loudly enough for me to hear from the kitchen during Thanksgiving dinner. And now poor Katie's trying to run a business. It's just too much pressure for someone like her. By year 5, Meridian had secured several major government contracts. By year 7, we were expanding into corporate security, developing proprietary software, and opening our second office. All while my family thought I was barely staying afloat, working some vague computer job that they couldn't quite understand or respect. Why maintain the charade? At first, it was simple self-protection. I'd spent my entire life being underestimated by the people who should have believed in me most. Their dismissal had become a strange comfort zone. At least their disappointment was predictable, unlike the chaos of building a business. And truthfully, success is easier without the complications of family members suddenly discovering your value and wanting a piece of it. As Meridian grew, so did the gap between my family's perception and my reality. I bought a beautiful home with a view of the mountains but told them I was lucky to find an affordable rental. I took vacations to New Zealand and Iceland but described them as budget trips I'd saved up for. I drove a modest car to family functions while my luxury SUV stayed in the garage. The more successful I became, the more I downplayed my achievements, until the deception became second nature. And it might have continued indefinitely if my brother-in-law Trevor hadn't lost his job 6 years ago. Elaine's husband had been a mid-level manager at a manufacturing company that downsized unexpectedly. With 3 kids and a mortgage on a house they could barely afford, they were in genuine trouble. My sister called me in tears, and for the first time I saw an opportunity to help without revealing the full extent of my success. Through a series of carefully orchestrated connections, I arranged for Trevor to interview at Mason Mutual, my father's insurance company where my brother now served as COO. He was hired quickly. My father was always eager to help his real family, and within 2 years, Trevor was heading their new corporate security division, specializing in protecting sensitive client data. What Trevor didn't know was that his department's security protocols and software were actually Meridian products, quietly sold to Mason Mutual through one of our subsidiary brands. I had convinced my brother that this particular vendor offered the best solutions, knowing our products actually were superior to anything else on the market. Michael, always eager to look competent in front of our father, took full credit for finding this excellent security partner. The irony was delicious. My brother and father were unknowingly becoming one of Meridian's most profitable long-term clients. As Mason Mutual expanded its digital operations, they relied more heavily on our security infrastructure, eventually contracting our company for employee training, system maintenance, and quarterly security audits. 5 other Mason family members eventually came to work in departments that directly used our products every day. I should have been satisfied with this private victory, and for years I was. I attended family gatherings with a secret smile, listening to Trevor and Michael discuss security challenges that my team had anticipated and solved months earlier. I nodded politely when my father boasted about Mason Mutual's impeccable security record, knowing it was my systems preventing the breaches that regularly plagued their competitors. Then came last month's family reunion at my parents' lake house, a 3-day event that the Mason family had maintained for generations. 42 relatives from across the country gathered to celebrate my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. The perfect setting for reminiscing, reconnecting, and apparently reminding Katie of her place in the family hierarchy. It started subtly. An aunt asking if I was still doing that computer thing, while simultaneously praising my cousin's recent promotion at a pharmaceutical company. My mother introducing me to distant relatives as her daughter who served in the military, were very proud of her service, with an emphasis that made it clear this was my sole accomplishment worth mentioning at age 43. I might have brushed these off as usual family dynamics, but then came the slideshow. My sister had created a beautiful photo presentation celebrating our parents' marriage and family life. There were dozens of photos featuring Elaine's academic achievements, Michael's business success, their children's milestones, and exactly 3 photos of me. My high school graduation, a single military photo where I was barely visible in a group, and one from last Christmas where I was partially cropped out. We just don't have many pictures of Katie's accomplishments, Elaine said apologetically, when my teenage niece pointed out the disparity. She's been so private about her work. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd had at 12 when my science project was relegated to the garage while Michael's soccer trophies dominated the living room. The same feeling I had at 22 when my parents skipped my military commissioning ceremony because it conflicted with Elaine's college parents' weekend. The sensation of being perpetually less than, despite everything I'd built. Still, I might have maintained my composure if not for the conversation I overheard later that evening on the deck. My brother Michael was speaking with Trevor and 2 of our cousins who also worked at Mason Mutual. The security division's our fastest-growing department now, Michael was saying, chest puffed with pride. My idea to bring Trevor in and develop that vertical has added millions to our bottom line. Brilliant move, our cousin James agreed. Who would have thought insurance needed that level of security? You were ahead of the curve. Speaking of security, Trevor added, lowering his voice slightly. Did you see Katie actually put CEO on her name tag at the charity function last month? Of her little company with what? 5 employees? They laughed, and Michael shook his head. Classic Katie, always trying to make her situation sound better than it is. Remember when she told Dad her team had expanded and it turned out she'd hired some college kid part-time? I stood frozen in the shadows of the porch, a glass of wine halfway to my lips. That college kid was actually a PhD in computer science we'd recruited from MIT, one of 30 new hires that quarter as we expanded our government contracts division. At least she's consistent, Trevor continued. The eternal black sheep? Still trying to prove she belongs. Though I do appreciate her sending those clients our way last year. Small contracts, but every bit helps. Probably the most useful business contribution she's made. Those small contracts were subsidiaries of a major client that had specifically requested Mason Mutual because of our security recommendations. Contracts worth over $2 million in annual premiums. Well, we can't all be business successes, Michael said with the satisfied tone of someone who believes he's earned everything he has. Someone has to be the cautionary tale. At this point, I just wish she'd stop trying to play entrepreneur and accept some help. Dad offered her that office manager position again last Christmas. Office manager. At the company running on my security. Systems. Reporting to the brother-in-law whose entire department I could dissolve with a single phone call. I stepped back into the shadows, my decision made. 15 years of invisibility had been my choice, but I was no longer willing to be their cautionary tale, their black sheep, their perpetual disappointment. It was time for the Mason family to learn exactly what Katie had built while they were busy underestimating her. The opportunity presented itself the very next morning when my father gathered everyone in the living room for what he called a family business discussion. This was an annual tradition where he and Michael would essentially hold court, updating everyone on Mason Mutual's performance and making minor announcements about family members' roles in the company. This year, Michael stood proudly beside our father, a thick folder in hand. We have some exciting news about our security division, he announced. We've been so successful that we're expanding the department and promoting Trevor to Senior Vice President of Cybersecurity Operations. Applause rippled through the room as Trevor stepped forward, beaming. Additionally, Michael continued, we're launching a complete overhaul of our security infrastructure, partnering with our vendor BlueSphere Systems to implement cutting-edge protocols across all our offices. BlueSphere Systems, the subsidiary I'd created specifically to serve clients like Mason Mutual, who might be hesitant to work with a woman-owned, veteran-led security firm. The subsidiary, whose leadership was officially meeting with Mason Mutual's executives next week to sign the largest contract renewal in our company's history. My father clapped Michael on the shoulder. This security initiative represents the future of Mason Mutual. $20 million of investment over the next 5 years that will keep us at the forefront of the industry. $20 million. To my company. Negotiated by my team. Created with my vision. The perfect moment had arrived. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 15 years of silence, of underestimation, of being the family afterthought. Actually, I said clearly, my voice cutting through the congratulatory murmurs, I have a business announcement of my own to make. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expressions ranging from surprise to slightly annoyed at the interruption. My mother's smile tightened at the edges, the way it always did when I was about to make a scene. My father checked his watch. Katie, we're in the middle of the Mason Mutual update, he said, his tone carrying that familiar note of patronizing patience. Perhaps you can share your news during the family talent portion later? The family talent portion, where my 5-year-old niece would play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on her violin, and my cousins would perform their annual karaoke routine. That's where my father thought my professional announcement belonged. This won't take long, I replied, moving to stand next to my brother and father at the front of the room. And it's actually relevant to what you're discussing. Michael gave me a look of bemused tolerance. Let me guess, you've picked up some freelance security consulting? His tone made it clear how little he thought of my professional capabilities. That's great, Katie, but we're discussing enterprise-level solutions here. I smiled. Actually, I wanted to congratulate Trevor on his promotion. The security division has indeed been impressive. Trevor nodded, surprised but pleased. Thanks. Katie, it's been challenging work? I'm sure it has, I continued, maintaining eye contact. Implementing Meridian Defense Solutions systems requires considerable expertise. Our clients consistently report that the learning curve is substantial, but worth it. The room went quiet. My brother's forehead creased. Meridian is BlueSphere's parent company, I explained, watching comprehension slowly dawn on Trevor's face. I founded Meridian 15 years ago after leaving the Army. My father waved a dismissive hand. Katie, BlueSphere is a major security firm. They have government contracts, corporate clients. Yes, they do, I agreed. As does Meridian, their parent company, where I serve as founder and CEO. The silence that followed was profound. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, her reflexive gesture when genuinely shocked. My father's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. But it was Michael's expression, a rapidly shifting kaleidoscope of disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror that I'll remember until my dying day. That's not possible, he finally managed. BlueSphere's CEO is Alexander Chen. I've spoken with him directly. Alexander Chen is our chief operating officer, I corrected gently. He handles client relations for certain accounts where we've found a woman-owned, veteran-led business faces unnecessary hurdles. I let my gaze sweep meaningfully around the room. Alex reports directly to me, as do our other executive officers across all Meridian subsidiaries. I reached into my tote bag, the unfashionable canvas one my sister had often suggested I upgrade when you can afford it, and pulled out my company portfolio. I'd brought it to share with a potential client in Atlanta after the reunion, but it would serve this purpose far better. Meridian Defense Solutions, I said, opening to our company overview page. Founded in 2009, currently employing 237 people across 4 states, with government and corporate security contracts totaling over $140 million annually. I handed the portfolio to my father, whose hands actually trembled as he took it. You'll find our corporate structure on page 4. BlueSphere Systems is our 3rd subsidiary, created specifically to service regional insurance companies and financial institutions. Elaine had moved to peer over our father's shoulder at the documents. This says Meridian is headquartered in Charlotte, she said faintly. You've been living in Charlotte for 12 years. Yes, I agreed. In the house I own. Not a rental. The same house I've invited all of you to visit multiple times. But Trevor was still struggling to process the information. When I interviewed with Blue Sphere representatives last month about our infrastructure upgrade, you met with Vanessa Parker, our VP of Client Services, and Daniel Rossi, our Chief Technology Officer, I supplied. They both reported directly to me afterward about the meeting. They were quite impressed with your department's implementation of our previous security protocols. My brother's face had transitioned from shocked to flushed with anger. "This is some kind of joke," he said, his voice rising. "You've fabricated these documents to, what? Embarrass us at a family reunion?" I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened my email, and handed it to him. "That's next week's meeting agenda for the contract signing between Mason Mutual and Blue Sphere, sent to me by my executive assistant yesterday. You'll note the contract value, $22 million over 5 years, not 20 as Dad just mentioned. The extra $2 million covers the expanded mobile security features your IT department requested." Michael scrolled through the email, his face growing paler by the second as he recognized names, figures, and project details that only someone intimately involved with the negotiation could know. "If you check the email signature," I added, "you'll see my full title." He looked up from the phone, stunned. "Katherine Mason, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Defense Solutions," he read mechanically. "This doesn't make sense," my father interjected, finding his voice at last. "If what you're saying is true, why have you been letting us believe you were struggling all these years? Why pretend to barely get by when you've been—" He glanced down at the annual revenue figures in the portfolio and visibly swallowed. "So successful?" It was the question I'd anticipated, and still, I found myself momentarily at a loss for words. "How do you explain to your family that their approval ceased to matter once you realized it was conditionally based on adherence to their narrow definition of success? How do you tell them that their perception of you as the family disappointment had become a peculiar form of freedom?" "At first, it was easier," I said carefully. "When Meridian was just starting, I didn't want to celebrate prematurely or deal with questions about why I didn't follow a more conventional path. By the time the company was established, it had become clear that my success wouldn't fit the narrative this family had created about me." I looked directly at my mother. "When I made my first million, I called to tell you. You cut me off to talk about Michael's new boat and asked if I was still doing okay with money in the same conversation." My mother's face crumpled slightly as the memory registered. After that, I decided to see how long it would take for anyone in this family to actually show interest in my career, to ask specific questions, to want to understand what I'd built. I turned to my sister. When Elaine needed wedding money, I didn't give her a check. I created a sudden bonus opportunity at my little security job, so she wouldn't have to know her black sheep sister was covering half her costs. Elaine's eyes widened in recognition. "That surprisingly generous client who insisted on paying you extra right when I was struggling with wedding bills? That was you manipulating the situation?" "It was me finding a way to help without upsetting the family dynamic," I corrected. "Just like when Trevor lost his job, I didn't offer to hire him at Meridian, where he would have reported to me. Instead, I orchestrated his hire at Mason Mutual, where he could maintain his dignity and this family could maintain its comfortable illusion about my capabilities." Trevor looked stricken. "You arranged my job?" The interview that Michael said came through. "His industry connection?" I nodded. "The industry connection was my company's head of personnel, acting on my instructions. I knew you were qualified and would excel in the position. I also knew Mason Mutual needed better security, and having someone I trusted in that department would benefit everyone." My brother had gone from pale to flushed again. "So all these years, while we thought we were offering you help, connections, advice, I was actually providing Mason Mutual with state-of-the-art security systems at preferential rates, sending clients your way and ensuring Trevor's department had inside access to our latest developments." I finished for him. "Yes, The room erupted into a chaos of voices. Cousins who worked for the family business looked shell-shocked. Aunts and uncles who had patted my hand sympathetically at previous gatherings were whispering furiously to each other. My father was still flipping through the portfolio, pausing occasionally to adjust his glasses as if the figures might change upon second viewing. "Why tell us now?" My mother's question cut through the noise, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "After all this time, why reveal this today?" I thought about all the possible answers, because I'm tired of the patronizing comments. Because Michael and Trevor's smug superiority last night was the final straw. Because I've achieved too much to continue being treated like the family charity case. But the truth was both simpler and more complex. Because I'm proud of what I've built, I said finally. Because Meridian is expanding again, and this time into public-facing security products that will carry my name. Because keeping this success hidden has served its purpose, and now it's time for something new. I looked around at the faces of my family members, some shocked, some embarrassed, some calculating the advantage of suddenly having a wealthy relative. In that moment, I recognized something I hadn't fully understood before. My need for their validation had died years ago, replaced by something more valuable: the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. The contract signing with Mason Mutual is scheduled for next Thursday, I continued, addressing my brother and father directly. Normally, I don't attend these meetings, but in this case, I'll make an exception. We should discuss whether you'd prefer to proceed with the agreement or find another vendor, given the circumstances. My father cleared his throat. "Another vendor? But you just said your systems are the best in the industry." "They are," I confirmed. "But I understand this revelation might make the business relationship complicated. I'm prepared to help you transition to another provider if that's what you prefer." The businessman and my father visibly wrestled with the father who couldn't reconcile his perception of his daughter with the evidence before him. The businessman won. "That won't be necessary," he said stiffly. "Mason Mutual makes decisions based on what's best for the company. If your systems are the best, we'd be foolish to look elsewhere because of," he hesitated, "personal considerations." Michael looked like he wanted to object, but remained silent, likely already calculating how it would appear to the board if they suddenly abandoned a carefully vetted security provider because of family dynamics. "In that case," I said, reaching to reclaim my portfolio and phone, "I look forward to meeting with your team next week. We can discuss the details then." As I turned to walk back to my seat, Aunt Judith, my mother's oldest sister in the family, matriarch who had never minced words in 82 years, broke the tension with a cackle of laughter. "Well, I'll be damned," she announced to the room at large. "Little Katie's been running the show all along. Robert," she addressed my father, "seems you've been cashing checks signed by your disappointment for years now." Aunt Judith's words hung in the air like a thunderclap, giving voice to the irony no one else had dared to articulate. My father's face flushed crimson, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. My mother looked physically pained, as though she'd swallowed something unexpected and unpleasant. "That's hardly fair, Judith," my mother finally managed, finding her familiar role as peacekeeper. "We never said Katherine was a disappointment. We just worried about her. Unconventional choices." "Like serving our country?" I asked quietly. "Or building a multi-million-dollar company from scratch." "You know that's not what I meant," Mom protested. "The military was just so dangerous, and we didn't understand why you'd choose that when you had other options. And afterward, when you said you were starting a business instead of using your GI Bill for college—" "I did use my GI Bill," I interrupted. "I completed my bachelor's in computer science and my master's in cybersecurity while building Meridian. Online programs, nights, and weekends. I graduated with honors from Georgetown." This revelation seemed to stun my mother into silence, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. "You have a master's degree?" my teenage niece Zoe asked, looking up from her phone for the first time since the conversation began. "But Grandma always said you were smart, but not school smart." The phrasing was so familiar, my mother's exact words repeated across generations, that I couldn't help but laugh. "That's what they believed, Zoe. I stopped correcting them years ago." An uncomfortable silence descended on the room. Several relatives suddenly found the pattern of the rug fascinating. Others checked their watches or phones, clearly desperate for this excruciating family moment to end. My father, ever the executive, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Well, this has certainly been informative," he said, clapping, his hands together once as if closing a business meeting. "Perhaps we should take a break before lunch. Catherine, I'd appreciate if we could speak privately in my study." Before I could respond, Trevor stepped forward, his expression troubled. "Before we break, I have a question. Catherine, does this mean you've been monitoring our work at Mason Mutual all this time? Evaluating my performance without my knowledge?" It was a fair question, one that highlighted the complicated ethical territory I'd been navigating for years. "Our client service team monitors system implementation and performance for all clients," I answered carefully. "But I personally established a firewall between Meridian's oversight of Mason Mutual and my family relationships. Your performance evaluations and departmental assessments were handled by other executives without my input." "But you knew," he pressed. "You knew how we were doing. When I came home frustrated about security protocols or celebrated departmental victories, I knew the general status of the account. Yes, I acknowledged, just as I do for other major clients. But I never used my position to interfere with your career trajectory, positively or negatively. Your promotion was earned, Trevor, not arranged." He digested this information, nodding slowly. "And the times I complained about unreasonable security update requirements or excessive verification protocols, I couldn't help but smile slightly. Those complaints reached me through normal client feedback channels. They were noted, but didn't influence our security recommendations, which are based on actual threat assessments. So all those family dinners, where I ranted about paranoid security vendors, were occasionally awkward for me, I admitted. But your professional frustration was separate from our family relationship. I respected that boundary even when no one else knew it existed. The subtle shift in the room was fascinating to observe. The initial shock was giving way to a complex recalibration. Relatives who had dismissed me for years were reassessing our every interaction, reviewing their assumptions and condescensions in light of this new reality. My cousin James, who worked in Mason Mutual's marketing department, looked particularly uncomfortable. "Those times I asked you for basic computer help at family gatherings were actually complex security questions that would normally cost a consultant hundreds of dollars to answer," I confirmed. "But family helps family, right?" James had the grace to look embarrassed. My father cleared his throat again, more forcefully. "Catherine, my study, please." I followed him through the lake house into his wood-paneled sanctuary, the room where he'd held countless man-to-man talks with Michael about business, while I was relegated to kitchen conversations with my mother about whether I'd ever find a nice man to settle down with. He closed the door behind us and moved to his desk, not sitting but standing with his hands resting on the leather surface, gathering his thoughts. I remained standing as well, unwilling to take the subordinate position in the visitor's chair without being asked. 15 years, he finally said, looking up at me. 15 years of deception. 15 years of privacy, I corrected. I never lied about my accomplishments. I simply stopped announcing them to people who had demonstrated they weren't interested. That's unfair, Catherine. We're your family. Of course we were interested in your success. Were you? I asked simply. When I called 5 years ago to tell you about a major government contract Meridian had secured, you interrupted me to talk about Michael's new condo. When I mentioned expanding to a second office, Mom changed the subject to Elaine's pregnancy. After a while, I stopped offering information that no one wanted to hear. My father's shoulders slumped slightly. For the first time, I noticed how much older he looked. 75 now, with deeper lines around his eyes than I remembered from my last visit. Perhaps we were preoccupied with certain types of achievement we understood better, he conceded. Insurance is what I know, what my father knew. It made sense to focus on Michael's continuation of that legacy. And it made sense for me to build something different, I said. Something that used my specific skills and experiences. That's all I ever wanted you to recognize. He nodded slowly, then moved around the desk to the small bar cart in the corner, pouring 2 fingers of bourbon into crystal tumblers. He handed me one without asking if I wanted it. A small but noticeable change. For the first time in my adult life, my father was treating me as an equal. To unexpected revelations, he said, raising his glass in a toast that carried a hint of wry acceptance. I clinked my glass against his. To seeing people as they are, not as we expect them to be. We drank in silence for a moment before he spoke. Again? 22 million, he mused, shaking his head slightly. The largest vendor contract in Mason Mutual's history, and it's with my daughter's company. The board will have questions about disclosure and conflict of interest. Blue Sphere has always been transparent about being a Meridian subsidiary, I pointed out. The connection to me personally wasn't disclosed because it wasn't relevant to the services provided. But if you're concerned, I'm happy to have our legal team prepare a formal disclosure document addressing any potential conflicts. My father regarded me with newfound curiosity. You really do know what you're doing, don't you? The question was so fundamental, so belated, that it almost made me laugh. Instead, I simply replied, Yes, Dad, I really do. He nodded thoughtfully, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Your mother will need time to process this. She had certain expectations about how her children's lives would unfold. I know, I said, but maybe it's time for new expectations, based on who we actually are, not who she wished we would be. That's fair, he conceded, though old habits die hard in this family. A knock at the door interrupted us. Michael entered. Without waiting for a response, his expression still unsettled but now carefully controlled. The family's getting restless, he said. Mom's suggesting we move ahead with lunch before Aunt Judith starts another round of uncomfortable revelations. Probably wise, our father agreed, finishing his bourbon. As we moved toward the door, Michael blocked my path slightly. For the record, he said, his voice low enough that our father couldn't hear from where he now stood by the window. I never would have treated you that way if I'd known who you really were. I studied my brother's face, the familiar features I'd grown up with, now arranged in an expression of calculated regret that had nothing to do with his behavior and everything to do with the consequences of my new status. That, I replied quietly, is exactly the problem, Michael. My value as your sister shouldn't depend on my net worth or professional title. I stepped around him and headed back to the main room, where the family was awkwardly reassembling itself, around new power dynamics that no one quite understood yet. As I walked, I felt a curious lightness. The weight of 15 years of hiding my true self lifted, replaced by the uncertainty of what would come next. Whatever it was, I would face it as my authentic self. Katherine Mason, veteran, CEO, no. Longer the family's black sheep, but not quite certain what my new role would be. And for the first time in decades, that uncertainty felt like freedom. Lunch was an extraordinary exercise in revised family dynamics. The long tables set up on the lake house deck, normally arranged with subtle but clear hierarchies, suddenly found themselves with a power vacuum. Where should the newly revealed CEO sit? No longer at the cousin table where I'd been relegated, for years despite my age, but not quite comfortable at the patriarch's right hand where Michael had always sat. My mother solved the dilemma by insisting I help her bring out the salads, effectively removing me from the seating arrangement entirely until everyone else had claimed their places. I ended up between Aunt Judith and my niece Zoe, an unexpected buffer generation between age-earned wisdom and teenage curiosity. Aunt Judith kept chuckling into her iced tea, occasionally muttering, all this time under her breath, while Zoe peppered me with questions about cybersecurity that revealed both her intelligence and the family's complete misunderstanding of my work. "So you catch hackers?" she asked, twirling pasta around her fork. "Like in the movies?" "Sometimes," I explained. "But most of our work is preventing attacks before they happen. We build systems that protect information, like medical records, financial data, or government communications." "That sounds way more interesting than insurance," she said, then glanced guiltily toward her father and grandfather. "Sorry," I smiled. Different industries appeal to different people. The key is finding work that aligns with your particular strengths and interests. "That's what I keep telling Mom," Zoe said, lowering her voice. "I want to study environmental engineering, but she keeps saying business administration would be more practical." Across the table, Elaine was engaged in animated conversation with our mother, pointedly avoiding looking in my direction. I wondered if she realized she was repeating the exact pattern our parents had established, steering her daughter toward conventional paths regardless of the girl's natural inclinations. "Environmental engineering combines scientific knowledge with practical problem-solving," I said to Zoe. "The skills are highly transferable if you ever change directions. And with climate challenges increasing, those specialists will be in high demand." Her eyes lit up. "That's what I've been trying to tell them, but they act like I'm suggesting becoming a professional finger painter or something." "Sometimes adults get caught in certain ways of thinking," I said carefully. "Especially when they believe they're protecting you from struggle." Aunt Judith snorted beside me. "Or when they're too busy protecting their own egos to see what's right in front of them." She patted my hand. "Your grandfather, my brother-in-law, was the same way with his children. Could never see past his own expectations to appreciate what was actually there." From down the table, my father cleared his throat. "We can hear you, Judith." "Good," she replied cheerfully. "Then maybe you'll finally learn something, Robert." 75 years old and still confusing respect with agreement. My mother intervened, as she always did when family tensions rose. "Who would like more lemonade?" "Katherine, could you help me bring out the pitcher from the kitchen?" In the kitchen, my mother busied herself with unnecessarily rearranging cookies on a serving plate, avoiding my eyes. "Mom," I said gently, "we should probably talk about this." She set down the plate with deliberate precision. "I just don't understand why you felt you needed to hide your success from us. What kind of mother wouldn't want to celebrate her daughter's achievements?" The hurt in her voice was genuine, which made my response more difficult. "The kind who consistently showed more interest in her other children's achievements," I said as kindly as possible. "Mom, when I called to tell you about my first major contract, you changed the subject to Elaine's engagement after less than 30 seconds. That's not fair," she protested. Elaine's engagement was big news. So was landing a $4.3 million security contract as a 30-year-old female entrepreneur, I pointed out. But one fit your understanding of success, and the other didn't. She turned away, reaching for the lemonade pitcher. "We just worried about you, always taking the harder path. The military instead of college, a startup instead of a stable job, staying single after your divorce instead of finding someone new." "Those weren't harder paths for me," I explained. "They were the right paths, the ones that aligned with my strengths and goals. And they've certainly paid off financially," she conceded, with a hint of something almost like resentment. "Though money isn't everything, Katherine." "No, it's not," I agreed. "Respect is important too. Being seen for who you actually are, not who others wish you would be." She turned back, finally meeting my eyes. "And who are you, Katherine?" because the daughter I thought I knew wouldn't have deceived her family for 15 years, wouldn't have watched her brother-in-law struggle with unemployment without offering him a position in her apparently massive company, wouldn't have let her sister worry about wedding expenses if she had the means to help. The accusation stung, partly because it contained a grain of truth. I had prioritized maintaining my cover over direct honesty, finding roundabout ways to help, rather than revealing my success. I did help, I reminded her. I arranged Trevor's job at Mason Mutual. I created that bonus situation to help with Elaine's wedding. I just did it in ways that preserved everyone's dignity and my privacy. Privacy from your own family, she said, shaking her head. I just never thought we'd raised you to be so secretive. Before I could respond, Elaine entered the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral. Everyone's asking about dessert, Mom. Of course, my mother said, immediately shifting into hostess mode. The cookies are ready, and there's ice cream in the freezer. She gathered the platter and hurried out, leaving me alone with my sister. For the first time since my revelation, Elaine leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So, she said after a moment, a multi-millionaire CEO. All this time. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? She finally asked, her voice low. Finding out that the sister I've been condescendingly supportive of for years has been, laughing at us behind our backs? Watching us struggle with bills and stress while sitting on a fortune? I was never laughing, Elaine, and I did help when you needed it. By deceiving me, she hissed. Creating fake bonuses instead of just being honest about who you were. Do you know how that makes me feel? Like a charity case. Like you were playing some bizarre game with all of us. Her pain was evident, and more complicated than I'd anticipated. This wasn't just about the revelation of my success. It was about the recalibration of our entire relationship, the rewriting of years of interactions where she'd been the accomplished sister and I'd been the one needing guidance. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I never intended to hurt you. At first, I kept things quiet because the business was new and fragile. Later, when it became successful, the patterns were already established. You and Mom and Dad had your narrative about me, and it seemed easier to leave it undisturbed. Easier for you, she said bitterly. Not for me. Do you know how many nights I lay awake worrying about you? Wondering if you were making ends meet? If your little business would survive another year? If you were lonely? The revelation that my sister had genuinely worried about me, not just performatively or condescendingly, but with real concern, caught me off guard. In protecting myself from their judgment, I'd failed to recognize their authentic care, however, imperfectly expressed. I didn't realize, I admitted. You thought we were all just dismissing you, she finished for me. Looking down on your choices. And yes, Mom and Dad struggled to understand your path. And yes, sometimes Michael was arrogant about his conventional success. But Katie, she caught herself. Katherine, I was proud of you for following your own path, even when I didn't understand it. Tears pricked at my eyes unexpectedly. You never said that. Because you never seemed to need my approval, she said simply. You were always so self-sufficient, so certain. When we were growing up, I was the one constantly seeking validation. You just did your own thing. Consequences. Be damned, I laughed softly. That's not how it felt from my perspective. I thought you were the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect friends, perfect life plan. Perfect anxiety, she corrected. Perfect fear of disappointing everyone. Perfect adherence to expectations. She shook her head. Do you know why I pushed business administration for Zoe? Because I know it's safe, reliable. I was trying to protect her from uncertainty. Like Mom and Dad tried to protect me? She nodded. The family pattern repeats, until someone breaks it. She gestured toward the door, beyond which we could hear. Zoe's animated voice asking someone, likely Aunt Judith, about women in STEM fields. She's brilliant, I said. Environmental engineering would be a perfect fit for her analytical mind. Elaine sighed. I know. I've just been scared for her. The world isn't always kind to women who choose unconventional paths. True, I agreed. But it's becoming kinder, and those paths aren't as unconventional as they once were. Companies like mine actively recruit women engineers. We need their perspectives and talents. A thoughtful expression crossed my sister's face. Does Meridian offer internships for high school students? We have a summer program for promising STEM students, I confirmed. Highly competitive, but I could make sure Zoe's application gets a fair review if she's interested. No special treatment? Elaine asked, her expression serious. No special treatment, I promised. Just a fair chance based on her actual abilities, not her connection to me. Elaine nodded, seemingly satisfied. I should probably apologize to her for not listening better about her interests. It's never too late to change the pattern, I said. A small smile touched her lips. Is that what you were doing today? Changing the pattern? I was tired of hiding, I admitted. Tired of being underestimated and dismissed. But I didn't anticipate how it would affect everyone else. The ripple effects of shifting the family mythology so dramatically. Well, Michael's ego may never recover, Elaine said with a hint of sisterly mischief. He built so much of his identity on being the family's business success story. He is a success story, I pointed out. Mason Mutual has grown significantly under his leadership. My achievements don't diminish his. She raised an eyebrow. Very generous of you considering how he's treated you over the years. I shrugged. Professional success and personal behavior are separate things. He's good at his job. He's been less good at being a supportive brother. And what about me? She asked, her vulnerability showing through. Have I been a good sister? The question hung between us, weighted with years of complex interactions. Had she been condescending at times? Yes. Had she sometimes participated in the family's dismissal of my choices? Also, yes. But beneath that had been genuine concern, however imperfectly expressed. You've been the sister you were raised to be, I said finally. Now we have the chance to be the sisters we choose to be, with all the cards on the table. She considered this, then nodded slowly. I'd like that. Though it might take some time to stop seeing you as my struggling little sister and start seeing you as who you actually are. Katherine Mason, I said. Veteran. CEO. Still your sister. Just with a few more dimensions than you realized. Katherine Mason, she repeated as if trying the name on for size. It's going to take some getting used to. I've thought of you as Katie for so long. You can still call me Katie, I offered. As long as it's not poor Katie or struggling. Katie or when will she get her life together Katie? A genuine laugh escaped her. Deal. She reached for the ice cream in the freezer. We should probably get back out there before they send a search party. Or before Aunt Judith starts telling everyone embarrassing stories from when we were kids. Too late for that, I said, picking up a tray of cookies. I heard her starting in on the story about you getting stuck in the chimney when I came inside. Elaine groaned. Fantastic. My dignity was already on life support today. As we headed back to the deck with dessert, I felt a subtle shift between us. A more honest equilibrium beginning to form. There would be more difficult conversations ahead with other family members, more recalibrations and realignments as everyone adjusted to this new reality. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that being Katherine Mason, my whole, authentic self, might eventually find acceptance in the family that had only ever seen fragments of who I truly was. The afternoon stretched into evening, hours filled with superficial chatter and deeper undercurrents as the Mason family attempted to process the seismic shift in their understanding. I noticed my father pulling Michael aside for an intense conversation near the boathouse, my brother's gestures growing animated before eventually subsiding into resigned nods. My mother fluttered between family groups like a nervous butterfly, her social autopilot engaged while her eyes revealed she was miles away, still processing the implications of my revelation. Trevor remained notably quiet, watching me with a new wariness whenever our paths crossed. I couldn't blame him. Learning your career had been subtly influenced by a family member you'd underestimated was bound to prompt some professional soul-searching. Meanwhile, Aunt Judith had appointed herself my unofficial public relations manager, regaling younger cousins with dramatically embellished tales of my military service and business acumen. And then Katie, forgive me, Katherine, led her team through 3 days of cyber warfare exercises with nothing but determination and a thermos of coffee. I caught her eye across the deck and mouth exaggerating, but she merely winked and continued her narrative, undeterred by factual constraints. At least someone was enjoying the situation. As the sun began to set over the lake, casting long golden reflections across the water, I found myself gravitating toward the small dock where I'd spent countless childhood hours. It was quieter there, away from the murmur of conversation and occasional burst of strained laughter from the main gathering. I slipped off my shoes and sat at the edge, letting my feet dangle in the cool water as I had decades ago. I hadn't been there long when I heard footsteps on the wooden planks behind me. I turned to find my father approaching, 2 crystal tumblers in his hands. Without speaking, he lowered himself to sit beside me, joints creaking slightly with the effort, and handed me one of the glasses. The bourbon caught the fading sunlight, glowing amber. For several minutes, we sat in silence, watching a family of ducks glide across the water's surface. It was a strangely peaceful moment amid the day's emotional turbulence. "Your grandfather built this dock," my father said finally. Summer of '62. I was about Zoe's age, handed him nails one by one while he taught me about pressure-treated lumber and proper supports. I nodded, familiar with the story, but sensing he needed to tell it again. He had very specific ideas about how things should be done, Dad continued. The Mason way, he called it. Insurance was the family business, had been, since his father's time. Never occurred to him that his children might want different paths. He took a slow sip of bourbon. I didn't, as it happens. Insurance suited me fine. But my sister, your Aunt Patricia, wanted to be an architect. This was not a story I'd heard before. Aunt Patricia had died when I was 10, and the family rarely spoke of her except in vague, saintly terms. "What happened?" I asked. "Same thing that almost happened to you," he said simply. The family couldn't understand her choices, couldn't see the value in her vision. She tried architecture school for a year, then gave it up. Came back to work at Mason Mutual, in the claims department. Married, had children, lived a good life by conventional standards. He swirled the bourbon in his glass, watching the ripples form. But there was always something missing in her eyes. A light that dimmed when she surrendered her dream. The parallel wasn't subtle. "Why are you telling me this now, Dad?" "Because I saw that same light in your eyes when you were a child. That independence, that vision. And I recognize now that I nearly made the same mistake my father made." He looked at me directly. "I'm glad you were stubborn enough to ignore us. Coming from my father, a man who valued family tradition above almost everything, this was extraordinary." I took a careful sip of bourbon to buy myself time to process. His words. "What changed your mind?" I asked finally. "What made today different from all the years of dismissing my choices?" He considered this. "Partly the undeniable evidence of your success, I suppose. $22 million forces even the most stubborn man to reconsider his assumptions." A self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "But mostly it was watching you today. The calm confidence when you explained your company's structure, the way you anticipated every question, the clear respect your achievement commanded without you having to demand it." He gestured toward the main house where family members could be seen through lit windows. You stood in that room as your authentic self for perhaps the first time since you were a teenager. And I realized I barely knew my own daughter. Not because you'd hidden yourself, but because I'd never looked properly. The admission cost him something. I could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the slight tremble in his hand as he raised his glass again. For what it's worth, he continued. I'm trying to see clearly now. Better late than never, I hope. It's not too late, I assured him, surprising myself with how much I meant it. We have time to get to know each other as we actually are. He nodded, then added with unexpected candor. I'm still processing the fact that my military daughter out-earns everyone in the family combined. I couldn't help laughing. That's not why I revealed everything today. This isn't about money. I know, he said seriously. It's about recognition, respect, things far more valuable than wealth. He hesitated, then asked, Would you be willing to speak with Michael tomorrow? He's struggling with all this. I wasn't surprised. Michael's identity had been built on being the family's primary success story, the natural business leader following, in our father's footsteps. My revelation had disrupted not just how others saw him, but how he saw himself. Of course, I agreed. Though I'm not sure he'll want to hear anything I have to say right now. He needs to hear it, whether he wants to or not, my father said firmly. The Mason men have a certain rigidity of thinking. It takes a significant event to break that pattern. This qualifies. The acknowledgement of family stubbornness, coming from perhaps its most prominent practitioner, was both ironic and endearing. I clinked my glass against his in silent recognition of the observation. As twilight deepened around us, conversation shifted to safer topics. Childhood memories of summers at the lake, updates on distant relatives, reflections on how the property had changed over decades. For the first time in years, I felt myself relaxing in my father's presence, no longer braced for dismissal or subtle criticism. When we finally returned to the house, the family had dispersed to various corners. Some played cards in the living room, others helped my mother organize old photo albums on the sun porch, and the teenagers had retreated to the basement game room. I slipped upstairs to my assigned bedroom, still decorated with faded posters from my high school years, and took the opportunity to check messages and handle several urgent work emails. As CEO, I'd learned to delegate effectively, but some decisions required my direct attention. I spent an hour on a video call with my executive team, discussing a potential acquisition and approving the final details for a government contract renewal. It felt strangely liberating to conduct business openly from my childhood bedroom, no longer concerned about keeping my professional life hidden from my family. When I finally emerged, the house had grown quieter. Most relatives had retired to their rooms or departed to nearby hotels. In the kitchen, I found my mother alone making a cup of tea. Work emergency? She asked, noticing my laptop tucked under my arm. Just routine business, I replied, setting the computer on the counter. Quarterly acquisition review and contract approvals. She nodded, regarding me with newfound curiosity. It's strange to think of you managing all that. In my mind, you're still the girl who couldn't remember to make her bed without 3 reminders. I've improved my organizational skills since then, I said with a smile. Though my executive assistant might argue I still need occasional reminders about certain things. You have an executive assistant, she repeated, as if testing the reality of this fact. And a company with hundreds of employees. People who report to you, look to you for leadership. Yes, I confirmed simply. Do you enjoy it? She asked, surprising me with the question. The responsibility, the pressure? I considered this. I do, actually. Building something meaningful, creating systems that protect people and organizations, leading a team of brilliant professionals, there's tremendous satisfaction in that work. And the military? she pressed. Did you enjoy that too? We always assumed you enlisted because you were running from something, rebelling. I enlisted because I wanted to serve, I corrected gently, and because the structure, the purpose, the emphasis on both individual excellence and team cohesion resonated with who I fundamentally am. It wasn't rebellion, Mom. It was alignment with my core values. She absorbed this, stirring her tea thoughtfully. I've spent 20 years worrying about the wrong things, haven't I? The vulnerability in her question disarmed me. You worried because you care, I offered. The mistake wasn't in caring. It was in not seeing that my path, though different from what you expected, was right for me. I want to see you clearly now, she said, echoing my father's earlier sentiment. If you'll give me that chance. I'd like that, I replied. She smiled tentatively. Then perhaps you could start by telling me about Meridian, the real story from the beginning. I'd like to understand what you've built. We moved to the sun porch, where she listened with genuine interest as I described Meridian's evolution from a 3-person operation to an industry leader. For the first time, I shared the challenges and triumphs that had shaped my professional journey, the early contracts that kept us afloat, the technological innovations that distinguished us from competitors, the mentors and team members who had contributed to our success. She asked thoughtful questions, absorbing the narrative of my career with newfound respect. When I finally checked my watch, I was startled to find it was nearly 2 a.m. I've talked your ear off for hours, I apologized. We should get some sleep. It's fine, she assured me. I've lost far more sleep over the years imagining worst-case scenarios for your life. The reality, even with all its complexities and challenges, is far better than anything I feared. The simple acknowledgement meant more than she could know. I hugged her goodnight, a gesture that felt different somehow, less dutiful, more authentic. Morning brought renewed tension as family members reconvened for breakfast. Michael was conspicuously absent until nearly 10, when he appeared in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, his business casual armor. He approached me as I was refilling my coffee on the deck. Dad mentioned you'd be willing to talk, he said without preamble. Yes, I agreed. Whenever you're ready. Now works, he said, gesturing toward the lakeshore path. If you're available. We walked in silence along the water's edge, morning sunlight dappling through the trees overhead. Michael maintained a careful distance, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. I've been Mason Mutual's golden boy for 15 years, he said finally. The son continuing the family legacy, the natural successor. Yesterday, I discovered my little sister, the one I've been condescending to for decades, could buy my entire company with what amounts to pocket change for her. It's disorienting. His frankness was unexpected. That wasn't my intention, I said. This isn't a competition, Michael. Easy to say when you're winning, he replied with a hint of his old sharpness, then immediately sighed. Sorry, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm trying not to say anymore. It's an adjustment, I acknowledged. For all of us. He stopped walking, turning to face me directly. I need to know something. All those times you helped Mason Mutual through Blue Sphere, the preferential rates, the client referrals, the expedited service, was that genuine business support or some elaborate revenge plan? Were you helping us succeed or setting us up for dependency on your systems? The question revealed his deepest fear, that my assistance had been a sophisticated long-game strategy to create leverage over the family business. That, like him, I viewed business primarily as a vehicle for power and status. Meridian provides excellent security services to all our clients, I answered carefully. We recommended Blue Sphere to Mason Mutual because your company handles sensitive financial data that requires robust protection. The preferential rates were a business decision based on volume and long-term contract potential, not family connection. And the client referrals? Were made because those companies needed the insurance products Mason Mutual specializes in, I explained. Cybersecurity and insurance are natural partners in risk management. The relationship benefits both companies and, more importantly, serves the clients properly. He studied me, looking for deception. So there was no master plan to eventually reveal yourself as the puppet master behind our security infrastructure? No calculated humiliation? I shook my head. I might have continued indefinitely as your anonymous vendor if not for the comments at the reunion. The revelation wasn't planned, Michael. It was a human reaction to years of dismissal coming to a breaking point. This seemed to satisfy something in him. His posture relaxed slightly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how I've treated you over the years. The comments, the condescension, it was insecure and unprofessional. The apology, while imperfect, represented significant effort for my status-conscious brother. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. We continued walking, the silence more comfortable now. What happens with the contract? He finally asked. $22 million is significant exposure for Mason Mutual if there are family complications. The contract stands on its business merits, I assured him. Meridian's relationship with Mason Mutual will remain strictly professional. My team has been instructed to maintain all standard protocols and service levels, regardless of family dynamics. He nodded, visibly relieved. And at family gatherings? How do we navigate this new situation? One day at a time, I suggested, with mutual respect and perhaps a bit more curiosity about who we actually are, rather than who we've assumed each other to be. I can try that, he agreed with surprising humility. As we completed the loop back toward the house, he added, just so you know, I've asked Trevor to continue leading our security division. He's earned the position on merit, not connection. I agree completely, I said. He's exceptionally talented at implementation and team leadership, exactly what that division needs. Michael gave me a sideways glance. You really do know your business, don't you? So do you, I pointed out. Mason Mutual has grown substantially under your leadership. Different industries, different paths, but we're both good at what we do. He seemed to stand a bit taller at this acknowledgement. Maybe the next generation of Masons can skip the decades of misunderstanding and just respect each other's strengths from the beginning. I'd drink to that, I agreed as we reached the lake house steps. The remainder of the reunion passed with a fragile new understanding forming between family members. There were still awkward moments, still occasional slips into old patterns, but beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the family's black sheep, the disappointing daughter with questionable life choices. I was Katherine Mason, veteran and CEO, finally seen for who I actually was. As I packed my car on the final morning, Zoe appeared with a notebook in hand. Aunt Katie? Katherine? Do you have a minute? Always for you, I said, closing my trunk. What's up? Mom talked to me about the environmental engineering program, she said, a tentative smile forming. She said you have internships at your company? For high school students interested in STEM? We do, I confirmed. Very competitive, but rewarding for students who are selected. Would you look at my application? She asked, holding out the notebook. Not to give me special treatment or anything, just to tell me if I'm on the right track. I took the notebook, touched by her initiative. I'd be happy to give you feedback. And Zoe, I'm really proud of you for pursuing what genuinely interests you, even when it seemed like your parents had different expectations. I learned that from you, she said simply. Even before yesterday, I always thought you were kind of awesome for doing your own thing. Her words affected me more deeply than the most elaborate apology from the older generation ever could. The pattern was already breaking with the next generation. Zoe had seen value in my journey even when everyone else had dismissed it. Keep that perspective, I told her. It will serve you well. As I drove away from the lake house, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation of the past 48 hours. For 15 years, I'd been the black sheep of the Mason family, the disappointing daughter who hadn't followed the prescribed path to success. Now I was driving back to my life as a respected CEO, no longer hiding my achievements from the people who should have been my strongest supporters. The revelation had been messy, emotional, and at times painful. Old wounds had been reopened, uncomfortable truths confronted. But beneath the discomfort lay possibility, the chance for more authentic relationships built on who we truly were, not who others expected us to be. I hadn't planned to expose my success that weekend. But sometimes the most powerful moments in our lives are unplanned, catalyzed by a comment, a slight, a final straw that breaks through years of carefully maintained facades. In that breaking lies opportunity for rebuilding something stronger, truer, and ultimately more rewarding. If you've ever been the black sheep, the misunderstood one, the family member who chose a different path, know that you're not alone. Your value isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it. Your success doesn't require external validation to be real and meaningful. But also know this: sometimes revelation is necessary. Sometimes standing in your full truth, however uncomfortable or disruptive, creates the possibility for genuine connection that hiding never could. I drove back to Charlotte that day with mixed emotions, but increasing certainty that the painful honesty of the reunion would ultimately lead to something better than the comfortable deception that preceded it. Not perfect, not immediately healed, but authentic. And authenticity, as I'd learned throughout my journey, was the foundation upon which everything valuable in life was built. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing this chapter of my journey from underestimated black sheep to recognized leader. If you've connected with this experience, if you've ever been misunderstood or dismissed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't defined by others' perception. If you enjoyed this journey of revelation and recognition, please consider subscribing to hear more stories of resilience, unexpected success, and the courage to stand in your truth even when it's uncomfortable. Leave a comment sharing your experience. Were you ever the family black sheep? Have you revealed hidden success to people who underestimated you? How did they react? Remember, sometimes the most powerful move isn't proving others wrong. It's finally allowing yourself to be fully seen, on your own terms, in your own time. And sometimes, when people discover who's really signing the paychecks, it opens the door to the respect and recognition that should have been yours all along. Until next time, this is Katherine Mason, reminding you that success isn't always loud, but truth, when finally spoken, resonates far longer than any applause.